everyone, Kate here for a very exciting video, and that is my favorite books of 2019. So I have kind of been agonizing over this list. I had a really hard time getting this down, and I have way too many on here. I think I might have 23, but I was like, you know what? Forget it. It's my channel, my rules, so I'm just gonna have a lot of books on here. And I don't have this in order because it was enough for me to like just pick what I thought were my favorites. So let's get into the books. And the first one is The Law and the Lady by Wilkie Collins. This was the like next to last, not next to last, but it was one of the very last books that I read in the year. And I'm so glad that I fit it in. I found this for like $1 at a library bookstore over a year ago, and I hadn't read it yet. And I hadn't read it yet because I felt less motivated to read another Wilkie Collins after having 3 in a row that I did not like. I didn't like The Haunted Hotel, Armadale, or No Name. And so I really wasn't feeling more, that motivated to try his books. And I started to think, well, his most famous are The Moonstone and The Woman in White. So that must be for a reason. But I actually do know a fair number of people that really like Armadale. So I am just so excited that I have another Wilkie Collins that I loved. There's not much I can say about this though, because it's such a twisty-turny type plot. But there is a woman, Valeria. I forgot her name for a second. I had to think of it. But Valeria, and when she marries her husband, she kind of knows that there's something from his past that she doesn't know. He has some kind of secret and she hasn't figured it out. But the longer they're married, the more she wants to know this. She does figure it out, and then everything goes haywire. She figures out this secret, and then the rest of the book, she's trying to find out more and more details that haven't been disclosed about the secret, or more and more details that she kind of has to put the puzzle pieces together. So that's kind of all I can say about the book, but just know my only complaint was that I couldn't read it fast enough. I really, really enjoyed this. It was so pacey, and I just loved how I couldn't put it down. There's some really interesting characters. I do think, as far as representation of disability goes, it's not an awesome treatment. So I really want to talk to other people who have read it, because there is a certain character with a disability in this book. And I kind of think like, what would other people make of this? Because I just can't decide what to make of Wilkie Collins' treatment of it. But it's just so fascinating. There weren't even actually that many characters that I liked. I was like, oh, they're one of my favorite characters ever. But I was just so invested in what was going to happen and what was going to be, investigated and found out. And it was just such a fun ride that I can't really fault it for not having characters that might not be ones that I love forever. And then another very recent read, and that is Death at La Fenice by Donna Leone. This is the first in the Commissario Brunetti series that is set in Venice, Italy. And Commissario Brunetti, he is like the chief of police in Venice. And I have been told by my dad, by Steve Donahue, by so many mystery lovers, in addition to that I would really like Donna Leone's series. But I just keep getting caught up with other series. And actually 3 years ago, Kate from the novel Nomad and myself were supposed to buddy read this, and she was successful in reading it. And I don't know why I didn't like the first chapter the first time I read it. But maybe I think I was probably juggling a lot of other books. I don't know. But I am really, really happy that I read it, because it's just exactly the kind of mystery that I want, where it has a really intriguing crime that has happened. And then we're getting the inspector and getting to know them. And there were so many scenes of seeing Brunetti with his wife Paola and his children, and like they play Monopoly one night. And so you really get these different aspects of his character. And there's so much talk of the setting, the food, the pasta, the bread being set in Venice, and beautiful writing describing the setting, really intimate portraits of all these different suspects, just exactly the kind of mystery that I like. They're the 29th Commissario Brunetti book is coming out in 2020. So I definitely have a lot of work ahead of me, and I just have far too many mystery series that I'm reading, but I was just too curious to wait any longer before trying this series out. And the next one I want to talk about is Pippi Longstocking. This is a book somehow in my childhood I missed it. I did grow up watching the like Swedish dubbed film, but this just really exceeded my expectations. I really, really enjoyed this. It was fun. I found the character of Pippi so endearing. She's larger than life. She's precocious. She has superhuman strength. I mean, what's not to like? So I definitely recommend Pippi Longstocking, and it was especially fun as a read aloud. Then In This House of Breed, this was a read in November, and it was such a unique reading experience, and that the entire time I was reading it, it was so challenging. The reading never came easily to me while I was reading this, but I think I just felt kind of entranced by Rumergotten's writing style. You know, you get such an intimate, in-depth portrait of this monastery and how things are really in flux after the abbess has died, and they're finding out secrets that she didn't tell them before she died, and things that will affect the fate of the monastery. And you're really getting to know these different nuns and their stories. Where did they come from? What made them decide to become a nun? It was just such an up close and personal, intimate portrait. It's such a quiet novel. It is not this instant gratification read, but it is really staying with me. And it was like not a question at all of whether this would end up on my favorites list. Then The Pursuit of God by A.W. Tozer. This was just such an empowering Christian nonfiction on how you can get so much satisfaction and joy out of your faith if you are willing to put in the work, in the time to really nurture your spiritual life and to help you grow in your walk. And I can't recommend it enough. And it's so deep at the same time, but being really approachable. Then Eden's Outcasts by John Madison. This was the first read for Louisa May 2020, and it was such a wonderful, wonderful way to start off the year. And just so interesting, exhilarating, heartbreaking, endearing way to learn about Louisa and kind of just all of the hard things that she went through, but the amazing, amazing things that she did despite really terrible health for most of her adult life. So I will link my full review down below for that. Then Adam Bede by George Eliot. This was definitely a highlight of Victober. I was so invested in this story. I was so invested in it, and I really wanted to know what was going to happen to the characters. It's pretty much George Eliot's retelling of the Scarlet Letter with some big alterations, but she takes inspiration from that. And just following the fates of these characters, and I loved just all the inner dialogue that George Eliot gives you, along with just beautiful, beautiful, poignant, reflective passages about society at the time and politics and religion and morals, and just so much packed into one book. It's such a rich, rich book. I definitely look forward to rereading Adam Bede at some point, and it's just really reminded me, like, George Eliot is an author I definitely want to be pursuing reading more in 2020, which is why Romola is the read-along I am hosting this month. Next is Emily of Deep Valley by Maud Hart Lovelace. So I had so much fun hosting with Kelly from Books I'm Not Reading. In the last year, we did Betsy Tacy 2019, where we read through the Betsy Tacy series and then the rest of Maud Hart Lovelace's Deep Valley books, which are set in the same world. And I loved Emily of Deep Valley. I kind of didn't know what I was going to think of it because it was just this standalone novel. I didn't know what I would think of Emily, but I loved it so much because of how people can kind of rise above the circumstances that they're in. Emily has a really hard life. She has a challenging life. And to see what she makes of her life, she decides she's not going to just hate her life. She decides she's going to make more out of her life and just give some just real richness to her life and to embrace it. So I really, really recommend Emily of Deep Valley if you just want a really nice, easy to pick up, heartwarming read I really like it. Then another great Victober read was The Doctor's Wife by Mary Elizabeth Braddon. I read this with Kate from the novel Nomad, and we both, the longer we get away from it, the more we think like, that was such a good book. It's kind of her take on Madame Bovary and what she kind of thinks of Madame Bovary. I'm not sure, but what I loved about it is that even though it is this really sensationalist plot, Mary Elizabeth Braddon does such beautiful, beautiful writing. So I love that it's this really gripping story, but the writing is not sacrificed in that. And then also our main character of Isabel, you see a really nice character arc with her. You know, she's really a fleshed out character, and I loved that. I loved the ending. I thought the ending was just perfect. Next, a really just a read that kind of shook me to the core, and that is Grania by Emily Lawless. And this is a book that's put out by Victorian Secret Publishers. And Emily Lawless was she was an Irish author. And she does have other books, but it looks like not a lot are in print. But Grania is the main character, and she lives on one of the Aran Islands. And I don't have the words to justify this book. It was such a powerful read, and when it just sucks you in, it's so incredibly immersive. And I love when there is a real like emotional force to novels, and also to the setting. You know, the setting of these Aran Islands really were so powerful and were such a big part of the plot. You know, they're just inescapable while you're reading this story. And I was so fascinated by the character of Grania, and it's very, very short. It's less than 250 pages. And I remember thinking at the end, like, oh, I did not know it was going to end that way. But then the longer I get from it, the more I think, no, I kind of think the ending was perfect as it was. So I gave that one 5 stars. If you're kind of up for just a really a novel that packs a punch, a Victorian novel, I really recommend Grania. Then Christy by Catherine Marshall. This was a book that I took a long time to talk about it on here because it was just so special to me. And it's the story of this young woman who wants to be a school teacher in a really poor community in the Appalachian Mountains, and the ways that she grows and learns from her time there. She kind of comes in thinking she's going to teach everybody, how to live. And then she just realizes how much she has to learn, and how people who live really differently than us, we can learn so much from them, and also how much we really have in common, just being human beings. And I just loved, it was just so emotionally engaging. I loved the writing, and I definitely want to read much, much more from Catherine Marshall. And then Hanna Coulter by Wendell Berry. I took so long to read this book because I was savoring it so much. I think Wendell Berry and Thomas Hardy might have gotten along because they both have this, I think Thomas Hardy called it the ache of modernism about them. And so kind of seeing how industrialization and technology has really changed things for small local farms, for small farms, and how they do things, how they're run, the success rates of them. But within that is a really deep, deep character study of this woman, Hanna, and you get to follow her throughout her life. And you just get such a up close and personal experience with these characters, Hanna, and then her different family members. It's just amazing. So that book has really stayed with me, and it made me totally decide to commit to the membership read along. They're calling it Kiri Reads. It's hosting it on Instagram, and just made me want to read so much Wendell Berry. Next is A Sorcery of Thorns by Margaret Rogerson. This was a case of the right book at the right time. I was really wanting in the summertime some just really fun YA fantasy, and this I loved how swept away I was by it. It involves books in a magical library. you know, in sorcery books, and there are certain books that have such powerful sorcery in them, they are locked up. And so at the very beginning of the book, one of these books is stolen and our protagonist is framed for it. In that, she's just like this like kick-ass heroine, and there's some romance that she has, and I loved it so much. It's so plot heavy, and I think it'd make a great reread too. So I really loved A Sorcery of Thorns. Then The Firebirds by Susannah Kearse Lee. This was an especially rewarding read because you're seeing characters and events followed up after The Shadowy Horses and Winter Sea. So I loved getting to see both of those and see the elements for both of those combined. And I loved that it traveled to Russia. I don't read a lot of fiction that is set in Russia, and so I think I just really enjoyed that. But kind of the payoff that you get from staying with characters from 2 previous books, and then you get to have all the reward in this final book, and I just loved it so much. Next is Someone at a Distance by Dorothy Whipple. This is my first Dorothy Whipple, and it is not really my typical kind of read because it's about the just the falling apart of a marriage, and it's really, really sad. It's heart-wrenching, but it's all kind of the angle that she told it in, where it still gives characters dignity at the end of that. And what made it such a like chilling experience is the how this marriage is falling apart. It seems so realistic how this would happen. It doesn't happen all at once, you know, it's all of these little occurrences that add up and just finally everything shatters. And I can't recommend Someone at a Distance enough. I really, really liked it. And it has really stayed with me. I think I read it in April or May, and it has just stayed with me so much. Then The Return of the Native by Thomas Hardy. This was an astoundingly just powerful Thomas Hardy book. It might be my favorite of his now. And again, you know, this isn't one that I would typically love, but I guess I do like more tragic Victorian novels than tragic modern novels. So maybe for Victorian novels, I'm kind of okay with it. I don't know, but just the interception of, you know, the landscape being such a huge pivotal part of the storyline, and then these characters that you get to know them one by one, and then you see different actions that have this ripple effect, and you get to see more and more of it, farther and farther spread out. And at the end, you're kind of just left reeling. Thomas Hardy, his books really, really hurt when you read them, but they have such staying power, and his writing is so beautiful. So it had to be on the list. I love it. I love The Return of the Native. I underlined about half of the book because it was just so good. Then The Girl of the Limberlost. This is by Jean Stratton Porter, and I did a buddy read of this with Elena, who is a subscriber, and we're planning on trying out some more Jean Stratton Porter. This is the story of Elnora Comstock, who lives in a rural community in Indiana, and how her mother is really hurt by events from the past and how this then affects her daughter in the current day. And there is just such a love for nature and landscape. Elnora loves to collect moths and butterflies, and she is such an endearing character. And I really, really, I think she and Anne Shirley from Anne of Green Gables would be great, great friends. So I definitely recommend The Girl of the Limberlost. It's a really nice classic where it was really approachable to read, and I just really, really enjoyed it. Then Caddie Woodlawn. This is a middle grade book I did not read growing up, and it charmed me so much because of the character of Caddie. They are settlers, and Caddie is fun. She's vivacious. She is active. She is strong. She's so strong, and she's brave. And the thing that made this book for me was Caddie, and just seeing, she's really winsome. I loved seeing her interactions with her family, and also getting to see how brave she is. There ends up being this really tense couple of chapters where there have been rumors that the local Native American tribe, which I can't remember which tribe it is, but has wanted to start a war, and it's not at all true. And because of Caddie, things are prevented, and she really you know, she works hard to keep peace in the community. And I just think she's such an admirable character. And I think such a role model for kids when they read it. And I really, really recommend Caddie Woodlawn. We're coming to the end. Again, these aren't ranked. These are just kind of in order of how I read them in the year, because I just wrote them down for my Goodreads, what I had read this year. Next is a really quirky book, and that is Flora and Ulysses by Kate DiCamillo. This is a book that has a really larger-than-life feel. It's kind of zany. And Flora is this little girl who is having kind of a rough time of things because her parents are separated and they really aren't getting along. And she's feeling all of that stress. You know, she's kind of internalizing it, and she doesn't know how to verbalize that she's feeling really sad about it. And one day this squirrel comes along and gets sucked up by her vacuum cleaner, which the brand for the vacuum cleaner is Ulysses. So she names the squirrel Ulysses, and it's just these crazy adventures that they go on together in this one kind of marvelous, over the top, just really crazy day. And it just really, really charmed me. I love that it's a combination of graphic novel and chapter book. So it's just a really cool mixed media, just all around fun reading experience. And that's why it's on my favorites. And that was one that I read for middle grade March. And then another one that I read and loved for middle grade March was Sweep by Jonathan Auxier. And this is historical fiction set in Victorian London. And there is a little girl who is a chimney sweep, and one day kind of passes out in the chimney sweep, in the chimney, and wakes up, and this piece of coal becomes alive. It has this, it turns into like this little creature, this little cute, endearing little coal monster, and kind of follows her around, and they go on all sorts of adventures together. But it's got so much emotional depth to it, and it really does just have so much going for it with I loved the setting of Victorian England, and getting to know more, like children would be hired as chimney sweeps and have to climb up chimneys in really dangerous spaces. And it was outlawed, Queen Victoria outlawed it, but it was just really, really heartbreaking to know that. But what I loved is just, it was such a full and impactful story, and I really, really recommend Sweep. And next is The Lost Flowers of Alice Hart. This was my first buddy read with Natalie from my reading days, and we both really, really enjoyed this. Alice Hart is a girl who witnesses a lot of tragedy in her childhood, and she doesn't really know how to communicate this. And then there's a certain turn of events. Some really, really tragic things happen, but flowers are kind of this constant in Alice's life. And I liked the way flowers were used in the storyline. It's a really beautiful, beautiful story. I definitely want to revisit it at some point, and I loved the character of Alice. Yeah, I was just really, really impacted by this book. I really recommend it. And then a really fun one that was a great winter read is Cinders, the Untold Story of Cinderella. So in my Cinderella Chronicles project, which I reached my, I was satiated. I guess that's what I want to say. I kind of read a lot of retellings, and now I feel content at the amount of retellings that I did, and that I read. And this was one of my absolute favorites. I loved this story because she is involved with archery in this. She's competing. She dresses up as a boy and is competing in these archery tournaments, or also just jousting tournaments in general, and gets to know kind of the Prince Charming that way. And so it's a really fun kind of she's the man sort of type swap there. And I really, really enjoyed it. I highly recommend it. It was just so fun. Yeah, I really, really enjoyed it. And then lastly, The Witch of Blackbird Pond, a middle grade book that I somehow missed out on as a child, and I don't know why. This was amazing. Elizabeth George Speare, I've read several of her books now, and I just want to read all of them. She just writes just really excellent children's historical fiction. And this is set in Salem, kind of during the witch trials. And I love like settler era America historical fiction. I love it so much. So I really hope that maybe someone who hasn't given it a try before would give it a try, because I just loved Kit so much. She's our main character. She moves to Salem from Jamaica. So obviously that's going to be so many kinds of culture shock going on there. And it's just so good. It has some, crazy turn of events because it's set in Salem during the witch trials, but I really recommend it. I hope you will all give it a try. So those are my... I need to get a breath now after my favorite books of 2019. I tried to narrow it down. What are you going to do? Those are ones that I enjoyed all of them a lot. So I hope you enjoyed hearing the list. I hope you had a great reading year. And here's to just the best reading year yet in 2020. I will be back for another video soon. Bye.